Hi, I'm Chef Richard. Today we're going to make a couple of the most common condiments that you see around the house all the time. Mustard and ketchup. You don't get much simpler than that, but whenever you have kids over, you have people, whatever, you need them. So in this case, let's go ahead, let's make a couple of them. I'm going to start out with ketchup, and there's no reason why I'm starting out with that one first other than mustard, except I've got a setup for that already. Ketchup's extremely easy to make, and it's relatively inexpensive too. We just start out with some tomato paste, light corn syrup, vinegar, salt, onion powder, garlic powder, and I like to just put in a little bit of cayenne pepper. Not much, but just a little bit, not to the point where it starts adding a lot of heat, but just where it kind of sparkles it up and brightens it up a little bit. So let's get going. First, go ahead and grab your pan, and let's put our tomato paste in. All right. Now, let's go ahead and put our corn syrup in. This is just light Caro syrup. Okay. Now we put a cup of syrup in. That was 12 ounces, by the way, of tomato paste. A cup of corn syrup. Now we're putting a cup of white vinegar in. Vinegar not only gives it a little bit of a snap and a little bit of a tang, but also remember, mustard and ketchup are shelf stable. In other words, you can go ahead and leave them in your counter, on your kitchen tops, whatever. They don't need refrigeration. They're shelf stable. And why can they be shelf stable? Because they have an acid content that's high enough that prevents any kind of bacteria or molding from growing. That number, by the way, is 4.6 on the pH scale. And at the end of this, what we're going to do is we're going to take both the ketchup and the mustard, and we're going to test the pH in there to make sure that you can leave them on your counter and they're going to be safe. Okay? Now, 2 teaspoons of salt, about 3/4 of a teaspoon of onion powder, about 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, and here, remember, I diverge a little bit, and I just put in just a sprinkle. I mean, we're not even talking 1/8 of a teaspoon, we're just talking a little sprinkle of cayenne pepper. And the cayenne pepper just gives it a little sparkle without giving it a lot of heat. So now let's go ahead and let's take it over to the stove. Once it's over on the stove, now we kind of have to pay a little attention to it, because what we want to do is we want it to boil. Because until it boils, the corn syrup won't thicken, giving it its consistent thickness, or at least the correct thickness on it. But at the same time, we don't want to get it too hot and burn it either. So we pretty much whisk this, not consistently or not constantly, but we should be whisking it quite a bit, quite often. And you can use a spatula or a spoon, or you can use whatever you want in this. The thing is, I've always found, like any chef has, that a whisk does such a good job of blending things in without having to constantly smash little particles that haven't gotten rubbed in or not. See, in this case, it's almost all rubbed in already. Right. Now we're just going to go ahead and we're going to let it cook here until it boils. Now, I said it's a more quite a bit less expensive to make your own. What was I talking about? Well, if you go down to your grocer and you go look for a bottle of actual ketchup, it usually runs about $4 to $4.50, somewhere around in there. Well, I kind of calculated the ingredients that I used, and to make about the same amount as a bottle of ketchup, it ran about 75 cents. So if you have 75 cents and probably 20 to 30 minutes, make your own. Besides, the nice thing about doing it yourself and making your own is that you can go ahead and if you want to add a little more garlic, a little more onion, in fact, even sometimes if you want to change it, up considerably. Here's one of the things I like to put in there. I often put in a little liquid smoke to give it a little smoky flavor. You can also do that with smoked paprika. Another one is chipotle sauce. If you really want it spicy, take a chipotle and adobo and blend that up together and put that in there. Generally, I don't want that hot, but I will often put a little chipotle sauce in there just to kind of tang it up a little bit. So feel free to make it however you want. It's your creation. Make it how you want it. All right, it didn't boil yet, but here's one of the most important things when you're of cooking. Taste it. All right? Taste it. If you don't like it, don't serve it. If it needs a little more garlic powder, onion powder, cayenne pepper, whatever, now's the time to add it. In this case, I just wanted to add just a little bit more garlic powder. It's got a nice tang. You can taste the vinegar in there. You can taste the garlic powder. You can taste the onion powder in there. And it's got a little extra brightness in there, so I know the cayenne pepper's working. Although, if you serve this, nobody would know you have cayenne pepper in there because it's not nearly that hot. It's starting to bubble here. It's actually starting to boil pretty well now. It'll probably be another minute or so. There. We'll turn off the heat. Let's whisk it just a little bit more. And here we are. Now we're going to let it cool down a little bit. You don't want to test the pH of it, or you don't want to test the acidity until it's gotten down to room temperature where it's actually going to be when you store it. So we're going to let it sit for a while. We're going to let it cool down. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to test it and we're going to bottle it. And I've got some of these little bottles. I bought them on Amazon. They have a little squeeze hole in the top of them, and you can open them up for filling. I use these for ketchup, and I use a little squirt bottle like this. It opens at the top, and of course you can take off the top to fill it. I use that for the mustard. So as soon as these are cooled off, we're going to go ahead and test them, and then we're going to go ahead and bottle them. Alright, now that we've made our ketchup, let's go ahead and make the mustard. Mustard is just as easy to make, but it is a little bit different in the respect that you also want mustard thick. You don't want it runny. But since there's no corn syrup or anything like that in it to make it thick, we have to figure out another way to do it. And there's a couple of ways to do that. One of them is using a cake flour, and a cake flour is just flour that's very, very finely ground. You can use that to thicken gravies, or in this case, thicken mustard. I'm just using Wandra here. And so we'll start out with a half a cup of water. Probably about 6 tablespoons of white vinegar. Couple of, about a tablespoon of Wandra flour. I have 6 tablespoons of just regular dried mustard here. I'm not going to put all of that in at once. And the reason is this is kind of potent stuff. And as I always say, you should taste things before you finally package it. So I'm going to put in, probably about 3/4 of it, somewhere around in there. We'll taste it after it's gone ahead and it's cooked, and we'll see what it tastes like. If it needs more mustard, we have it. All right. You wonder where mustard gets its good yellow color from? We add probably about 3/4 of a teaspoon of turmeric, and I've had people, tell me it's called turmeric. Okay, however you pronounce it. It's still that stuff that gives it this nice yellow color. About a half teaspoon of salt, a little bit of garlic powder, and here's also something that helps add a little color too, and it's just a little pinch of regular Hungarian paprika, and that tends to redden it or give it a little slightly reddish color in there, which also helps the brightness of it. So like the ketchup now, let's go ahead and take it over to the stove, and let's cook. Now remember, if this is too thin or too thick, If it's too thin, we can add a little more corn or a little more of the cake flour. Or if you want, just go ahead and use cornstarch in there. That also works. And if it's a little too thick, either add a little more water or a little more vinegar to it, depending upon if it's tangy enough. So let's just go ahead and let this boil, and we'll see what the taste and consistency is at that point. Actually, that's a little bit on the thick side, so I'm going to add a little more water. All right. Once again, don't ever feed anything to guests or whatever until you've tasted it and you would eat it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a little bit more of the rest of that mustard in there. And with that extra powder, I'm also going to add just a little bit more vinegar. I didn't want to add too much water because remember, we don't want that pH to drop to the point where bacteria is going to grow. So when we add a little water, if you have to add anything else, make sure you add an equal amount of vinegar. Try it. Much better. All right. Let's go ahead and light the ketchup. Let's let this cool. We'll give it a few minutes and then we'll check it. We'll let it cool. Okay, now that our ketchup's cooled down a little bit, now it's time. We got the last two things to do. First, we got to check our pH, and second, we have to go ahead and bottle it. So for this case, I've got a little pH meter here. You can find these about anywhere. The trick here is to make sure that they're calibrated periodically, because they're known if you don't calibrate them, you're not quite sure. It's not that they go really bad, they don't, but you want to make darn well sure that they're still registering correctly. Okay, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm testing it now. It's about listed at about 6 out here in the air. I put it into the ketchup and it's 3.3. Now, who thought there was going to be a quiz on this? Yep, there is. Remember I gave you a magic number that if anything has an acidity of 4.6 or less, whoops, I just gave away the answer. Yep, that's what it was. It was 4.6. And since this is registering at 3.3, we don't have to worry about it. It's completely shelf stable. No. What would happen if it is above 4.6? Well, first off, you know, if the flavor's good, you want to keep it. go ahead, but remember you have to refrigerate it and it won't last nearly as long. So, alright, I take one of my handiest little tools in the kitchen, a funnel, and we just use that to bottle like such. Right, now that we've bottled it, put our cap on, voila, we have ketchup. This one won't fill up because we didn't make that much of it. Go ahead and cap this one. What will I do with this? I'm not going to throw it away. I'm much too cheap for that. I'm just going to put it in the refrigerator. That's what I'm going to use. Well, that pretty much completes it for the ketchup. Let's give it another minute or so and let the mustard cool down. We'll go ahead and test and we'll bottle that as well. Alright, now that the mustard's cooled down, let's go ahead and do the same thing. Check the pH. We're down to about 3.5. So 3.5 is well below our 4.6 number. It's acidic enough. In this case, yes, it is shelf stable. Oops, I spilled. All right. There you have it. We made mustard and ketchup. It hasn't taken long. It didn't cost a lot. And we made it ourselves. So, once again, thanks for joining me. Have a good time. Until next time, remember the prime directive. Cooking should be fun. Bye.